on X digital Fireside series titled Bridging Codes and Careers Navigating the AI Driven Economy. My name is Benjamin Shiller. I am an associate professor of economics at Brandeis University. My research interests fall in what I call the economics of digitization, really looking at how technological change impacts markets. I have sort of taken a somewhat different career path than most economists in that a lot of my research is forward looking. I'm predicting sort of how technological change will result in changes in the future. So, for example, I have a research project that looks at, well, predicted basically that these streaming services would take over at a time when most people were just buying individual songs. I have a research project that's yet to come true, but predicting that personalized pricing will take over, and other things along those lines. I also teach a class called Economics of Digitization, and so my interest really is in how technology changes the future. Patricia, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So my name is Patricia, and you've probably seen in my profile, I'm a consultant with Ferry. Prior to the live session, we were just talking backstage. Now, Ferry, although we're known for very much known for executive search, there is an advisory arm which I'm part of. The work that I do is very much centered around people, culture, leadership type of advisory, and our clients are these for the past, I would say, good 6 to 10 months have been talking about rapidly scaling, AI in their workforce. So in terms of what I'm witnessing on the ground, it is really, really fast paced, and especially, not sure if everyone knows, I'm in Singapore. Singapore is a small red dot. That's what we call ourselves. We are very much heavily relying on the knowledge sector. So the AI really is something that is most welcome because we do lack human resource in that space. So Singapore itself is really ramping up on that, and that's what we are seeing on the ground. But at the largest scale of obviously the workforce, the impact, obviously there's always going to be a trade-off. So I'm really keen to talk about this topic with the panel.
Okay, great. Valerie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. My name is Valery Yakubovich. I'm Executive Director of MAC Institute for Innovation Management at Wharton. In this role, basically what I do, I oversee our programs, initiatives, basically which start with faculty research. We support faculty research, innovation, entrepreneurship, technology-driven. In this sense, any kind of disruptive technology that emerges immediately gets on our radar because our corporate partners come to us with problems around them. Our faculty do research on those topics. Students need to learn about those technologies and their implications for business, for life, and so on. So obviously, in that sense, AI is on our radar today in all different kinds of shapes and forms. My own research interests are at the kind of a more micro level, how these technologies affect humans in organizations and markets. And so I do research and write about organizational implications of generative AI in particular these days. And the basic idea is that all problems and challenges that we face, they aren't so much technological. Usually these technologies take off or don't take off as expected because of organizational reasons, right? So looking forward to discussing these issues here. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, great. Prabita, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work at Korn Ferry as well, just like Patricia. But I'm in the Korn Ferry digital side of the business where it's very interesting because in Korn Ferry, we say we know talent really well. We know, what makes people, perform to the best potential in organizations. And my focus area is HR tech. So the technology that enables people to perform their best. And so when I think about AI, I always look at it in two lenses. So one is we spend a lot of time doing the research on the future of work, how are employees, what roles are they going to do in the future, who are we hiring, how are we hiring them, how will AI augment the workforce, what skills are going to look like in the future, how is that evolving. So, how can our technology help with that? But I also leverage AI in building the products. So I'm also constantly looking at how is AI evolving? How can I bring that into the product that we're building? So what does the AI technology look like? How fast it's evolving and how that can be harnessed to help humans ultimately. So this is a very, very interesting topic for me. So I'm really looking forward to discussing this, especially with Patricia and Valerie, both experts in their fields.
Great. So let's jump right in. Let's get to the meat of this. So Patricia,
Yes.
I have a question for you from
Yeah.
your experience in leadership advisory at Korn Ferry. How is
Yeah.
AI reshaping leadership requirements across industries? Are there specific skills or mindsets that emerging leaders should cultivate to navigate this evolving landscape?
Yeah. When I had a chance to sort of really think about how AI is impacting the way we work, right? We always talk about, future of work, and this term future of work has been thrown around, like a decade, about. And I actually do echo a lot of what Prabita is saying, not because we come from the same company, but also it really is how Gen AI has really changed the way I work. In fact, not just what how my client works. So we are really in, that state of I suppose the future is here. That's what I'm trying to say. And what I'm seeing is that AI is not just reshaping the way we work, it's also shaping the leadership requirement across industry. And no one industry is spared. That's how I'm seeing in terms of the different types of clients that I work with. So a quick one in terms of the industries that I've been working with is you have a range of healthcare to NGOs and to banking. Of course, banking is something that they typically, kind of get on the trend first. And then, and also to real estate, property, construction and development. So these are kind of like my portfolio of clients that I manage. Now, I remember, and some of these Gen AI ways of working, this sort of, we call it disruptive, although I think it's a positive disruption for my work because it has added a lot of value to how I think, is that the key skills that we realize that people are trying to grapple is that there are hard sort of skills and then there are softer sort of skills. And when we think about Gen AI, a lot of us, the first reaction is people are thinking about, I'm talking from a lay person perspective, people are thinking about, robots are taking over. People are thinking about how AI is going to take over everything that, humans have been working hard towards to, right? And some of the things that we realize that when clients are looking at Gen AI, they are looking at how they can look into what's more value added for them when it comes to the work itself, and what are those things that can be sort of lower, more transactional, lower value added processes. Now, this bit of value chain, if you may, has now, Gen AI has now make us and forces us to look at more value-added job. We were talking about more value-added job automation for the past 5 years in Singapore, and now it's here. I think there are obviously different school of thoughts, how fast this has kind of come to us. Last week, one of the biggest banks in Singapore is laying off 6,000 people from their workforce because of Gen AI, simply because they are ready to automate risk and compliance part of the business, back office and mid office. And front office, of course, are more client facing, are more that requires more human touch for now, has still able to retain the roles. Now, when we think like that, we flash back in terms of how exactly the naysayers are thinking about, bots are taking over our jobs. But what I see, and perhaps also because I have benefited a lot from working with Gen AI as a colleague. That's how I see my day-to-day work. And what it forces clients and industry to look at is, how do I differentiate myself as a talent? How do I differentiate myself as a leader? So the hard skills is something that the technology can override and in fact learn faster. Do we need it? Yes, we absolutely still need it, because what would school teach? What would and I could be totally wrong. I'm keen to hear from you, Benjamin. I'm keen to hear from you, Valerie, that I could be totally wrong. And when I say hard skill, I'm talking about math. I'm talking about science. I'm talking about language. I'm talking about this sort of topics in school, and the softer skills. This is what a lot of my advisory work involves in, and this is where organizations now realize that they need to ramp up their people on these leadership skills. So the leadership skills that we call it behavioral skills as well. These are some of these things here that we saw as becoming more and more important, and it's already important before, but it's now more called out because of how Gen AI has disrupted the way we work. So some of the things, so going a big roundabout, coming to the question, is adaptability and agility. No surprise there. And a lot of it, critical thinking to problem solving. Without critical thinking, you can't really problem solve. And there are bits of it that comes to mind also is systemic thinking. Systemic thinking, meaning in our definition, is that how do you draw upon your critical thinking, connecting the dots, making sense in terms of how that translates into solving, and doing work from a day-to-day perspective. Other two that really comes out now, obviously there's a whole host of much more nuanced sort of skills, but other two that are more sort of softer side is openness, willingness to learn. That goes into the adaptability and agility as well. But at the most sort of fundamental level is the willingness to learn, the curiosity of things. And last but not least, a very humanistic value, which it's also quite debatable these days with some of the stuff that I hear from clients, are empathy. And that's something that at this point in time, we in Korn Ferry, at least in the consulting space I'm working with clients, are something that would stood out. Now, the reason I say is debatable in terms of empathy is that yesterday I was just talking to a social service NGO organization in Singapore. And this is an organization that works very closely with youths on mental health issues. And they are now talking about, because these are people who need to handle a lot of first line helpline calls, on a voluntary basis. And because of the volume, they're now thinking about how do we automate this with a voice bot that can immediately detect emotions and then would then trigger empathy in the voice with how the bot will interact with the person. Now, this is highly contentious. For me, that itself, I'm not sure in terms of ethically how that would be. So that's something that I'm keen to talk about. So there we go. That's kind of like a long sort of way of explaining what I am observing in the industry, how it's reshaping skills. And what else? I think on a closing note is that we all know the talent landscape has shifted dramatically, which is why we have this talk today, where I feel like if we don't keep up, there is a chance that we will need to, we have to keep up. If not, we will be left behind. And that's what I'm seeing. It is really, really fast in how things are moving. And to me, the future of work is here, where we need to integrate and do collaborate with Gen AI to make more impactful work. Now, where the balance is, I don't know, don't have the answer to it. But I, for one, currently see Gen AI as one of my colleagues. So that's my final note. Yeah.
Very interesting. I picked up a number of things there. I hadn't really thought about the empathy piece, but I guess if maybe that is where it's heading. If people can fall in love with an AI agent, maybe they can also learn to have empathy. Okay, so that's great. Maybe I'll jump into the question that I guess I'm directing at myself, which is how do I see AI-driven platforms influencing labor markets and career paths in the coming years? And this is a really challenging question. You can kind of think of it. There's actually two different ways you could think about it. So there's always the potential that AI ends up replacing certain careers. The one that I think probably will happen first in terms of a large sort of set of careers is anything that involves driving a vehicle. Right now, I know that there were a lot of claims, and now people have sort of chilled on the idea that self-driving cars will become common. But I think it was just slower than anticipated. It is actually happening, and it's rolling out to more and more cities. And when that actually takes place, I think it'll happen fast, and then 3 to 5 million people in the U.S. will lose their jobs, be replaced by AI. And so that's going to be a big dramatic change. There's going to be a lot of people looking for new jobs at that time. But it's also somewhat more complicated than that, because at least historically, if you looked at technological change, some technological changes that you think would displace jobs have actually not led to reductions in the workforce. So a widely cited example is ATMs. So people thought that basically bank tellers would be irrelevant once we had ATMs. But what happened with ATMs is that they increased the demand for banking, right? It just sort of lowered the cost. They were much more easily accessible. And so many more people got bank accounts and they used them more frequently. And so that increase in demand actually meant that the overall workforce of bank tellers did not decline. It did as a percentage of jobs in the country, but in absolute terms, there were actually more bank tellers 30 years after ATMs were introduced. And so, sometimes it can augment what people do or build demand. And I think there's a lot of, similarities today if you think about computer science skills. I think about programmers, right? One concern is that generative AI, which is pretty good at programming, it's not perfect, pretty good at programming, might replace a lot of people who their job was writing code. But another possibility is it makes them more efficient at writing code. And maybe instead of having fewer programmers, we just have lots of more programs out there, people buying much more, many more types of software at a lower price. But since most of the labor was generative AI, I have a smaller team of programmers, and so they still are doing reasonably well career-wise. And so getting back to the hard skills, I do think that the hard skills matter. I've used generative AI myself. I've tried to use it in research. And generally what I found, at least regard to coding, is that if you ask it a question with a good prompt, it'll actually get you something like 95% of the way there. It won't completely solve the problem for you, especially for harder problems. There will be mistakes, but it'll get you the structure, most of the structure, what you're trying to do. And then if you know what you're doing, if you know how to code, then you can, then you can find fairly quickly where the mistakes are, and can really use AI as a productivity enhancer. If you don't know anything about coding, then it's going to be very hard to find where the mistakes are. So I think that's something to definitely think about. I think that the hard skills will still matter. Okay. So in general, I think it's actually hard to predict which careers will be replaced by generative AI. If you think about 15 years ago, there just wasn't a belief, or maybe 20 years ago, there wasn't a belief that computers could ever drive a car. Now I think we accept that they probably can do so fairly well, but it just seemed like such an unstructured task that was hard to practice. And so there was an idea that this would never happen. And so I'm hesitant to make predictions in the future. Right now, I think that because of the limitations that I mentioned a minute ago, generative AI cannot just replace programmers. You need programmers in the loop to correct these errors. But generative AI is only a few years old at this point, the consumer-facing products. And so in 5 years, who knows? It might just replace programmers. So it's just very hard to predict. But if you look at history, I still think there will be a role for people. There's well-known examples of when computers started beating people in chess, right? And that was considered a giant breakthrough. But I remember looking several years after that, and I believe it's still the case today, that the best chess sort of team is a combination of a computer and a person. That still beats just computers. And so human input is still valued, even in this problem that they spent a lot of time trying to work on. So I guess maybe that's not providing the specifics or directions that some people listening in are hoping for, but I think it is going to be challenging to predict the future. And anyone who claims to know with certainty what's going to happen is probably someone that you want to discount to some extent. So why don't I turn it over to Valerie? I'll direct the question towards him. So given your research on AI integration and human resource management and organizational innovations, what challenges do you see companies facing when embedding AI-driven decision-making into their existing structures? And how can they effectively address issues like data limitations and employee acceptance?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. First of all, I think we can have a little back and forth around these questions, right? So time-wise, I think we are doing pretty well. So just kind of to quickly react to what I've heard so far, and what's relevant actually to my comments, is that one question is whether we see automation of tasks or jobs, right? Because if we all now use generative AI for our knowledge management and knowledge generation and processing problems, right? But it's a small piece of what we do. Right? Software developers, there are people like freelancers who just write a code, but even in organizations, software developers don't just write a code, right? They have to handle other, the agenda issue, commitments, coordination. There are all kinds of other things we need to do. So are we automating jobs or tasks? I think it might be one interesting question for us to discuss. And then what Patricia said about the need for leadership skills. In what sense? I think I also believe they're needed, but why suddenly generative AI, its emergence, creates kind of demand for more leadership skills? One thing I want to put on the table, as and if, and there are a lot of things to clarify, we are moving towards AI agents in organizations, right? Then you do need to pretty much everyone becomes a leader and manager. If you don't have subordinates, people, humans, you'll have subordinate or co-pilot AI agents, right? Then you have to manage them. And I would argue it's not more like the tools and machines we used to manage. It's more like people we need to manage. And that brings me to my own kind of research. So basically what we see in organizations when we talk to them about how they're implementing these technologies, and my, as I mentioned before, primary interest is at the level of micro level, basically human, HR-related issues. And the first thing what I realized when I kind of started engaging with companies about this. Remember, data science is already about, I would say, at least 17, 20 years old. We started talking about big data back in the 2000s, right? You go to talk to the majority of companies, they're still dealing with big data. They can't organize it, they can't process it, they can't curate it, they don't know the quality of the data. And there is a big lag between high-tech companies, they claim they do everything, and others who don't have data lakes, they don't have data warehouses. It's a huge problem. And why it's a problem, again, it's what I mentioned at the beginning, it's not an organizational, technological problem, it's an organizational problem. There are competitions among silos in organizations, everyone wants to control that data. There are risks involved. If you want to train a powerful algorithm, you feed into that, like we know how much data you need to train a foundational model. Companies sit on huge amounts of data, but do you dare to just feed it there? What you'll get, what you're going to learn from the machine, from the generative AI, huge risks and potential kind of liabilities, right? So that's the first problem. Data, if somehow OpenAI managed to train their model on the whole internet, legally or illegally, companies can't allow themselves to do the same, right? So how are we going to deal with this? It's the first issue. So my key point is things are not going to happen that fast, right? So the second challenge we see, it's about decision rights. As you gave in your examples, very often what happens, we get generative AI creates tons of output, right? Of a variable quality. Who is going to review all this and certify that it's the right output for our organization? If, for example, I can summarize a huge amount of documents that before no one could go through, it produces a summary. Do we know it caught everything we want to catch? And how do we solve this problem? So suddenly, and then think about also, we used to rely, let's say, on a marketing function to produce marketing reports, presented to the leadership or the board and make an argument for marketing strategy. Now people in other functions who used to just trust the marketing department, if the issue is contentious, they can produce their document on marketing prospects for the company and argue against marketing specialists who are going to adjudicate all these decisions and politics in an organization, which is now can be supported, but much more sophisticated arguments, much more information, right? So decision rights, I think it's a very important issue. And also which decisions you leave to humans and which decisions you delegate to AI agents, right? Because at the end of the day, great gains in productivity will happen only if you let these agents decide something. You don't need to babysit them and verify every kind of claim they make, right? But it's tricky, and we don't see companies moving there yet, right? So decision rights is the next issue, which is a kind of a major importance. And overall, how I think about this, basically, if we compare traditional automation, right, where you have a very cleanly defined input, very explicit machinery, what the machine is doing, we know. And how it produces the output and what quality of the output we expect, we also know. Now think about generative AI. Anything in, black box the machine, anything out. There is no certainty there. So there is no parallel with the technologies we had before. What it leads to, you need for now to babysit pretty much each Gen AI, GPT, or whatever you call it, or agent, if you start moving there. How you optimize it, remove humans from each agent and create kind of a human in the loop who can intervene. For example, I used to drive one car. We had one car per driver. Now Waymo has people sitting in some office monitoring multiple cars and then intervening when issues emerge, right? So that's kind of how we can gain productivity. But I should say about autonomous driving, here at Wharton, we have great research on autonomous vehicles. in the engineering school. Our professor who leads that effort claims that, contrary, Benjamin, to what you're suggesting, that we are not going to get there. Waymo makes noises that they're already driving in San Francisco and other places, but basically they are losing money. The technology is very expensive. When it will get there, when regulatory frameworks will allow kind of gains in productivity, it's still a very kind of uncertain variables. What they're doing here, they're introducing these autonomous vehicles in more controlled environments, where you, like big factory floors, warehouses, what Amazon does, for example, where you have more control over the routes and how things evolve. You can make some vehicles autonomous. And it brings me back to this issue that as we move up from using these tools, using this AI, generative AI as pilots, to making them independent teammates, for example, who can make some decisions, or turning them into agents who have like control over some area of activities, we basically lose control, right? But we gain productivity. So there is a trade-off. We want to gain more productivity, we have to give up some control over these tools. And they are not tools anymore, right? If you give them autonomy, agency, we can argue how far you can go there. They become something else, not traditional technologies. And how to manage them, this is where jobs come in. In that sense, I agree with Patricia, for example, that leadership skills will be needed to lead these agents in addition to humans. Right? So I guess I'll leave it here for now for future discussion. But basically, that's the key point. The dilemma we face with the quality of the data and how to control the tools, the technologies vis-a-vis gaining productivity using those technologies.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. That just because something is technologically feasible doesn't mean that it's economically viable.
And organizationally as well.
And organizationally, and there can be big differences between the two. So very interesting. And the last guided question goes to Pravita. So you have successfully transformed traditional services like coaching, assessments, and sales training into SaaS products integrated with collaborative platforms like Microsoft Teams. What are the key challenges organizations face when transitioning from service-based to SaaS-based business models? And how can companies ensure a smooth adoption of AI-powered talent solutions at scale?
Ooh, okay. Thanks for that question. So I'm thinking a little bit about the attendees on this call, and maybe I take a moment to explain some of these terms, right? So as I said earlier, a lot of what I do is to think about how can we scale what traditionally has been a human touch to technology enabled with AI in order to serve employees, humans at scale. Not everything can be replaced by technology and AI, but there are parts of things that maybe earlier, not everyone would have access to. Today, technology and AI enables that access to everyone. So I love to call this, it's like democratization of some of the things that we would have in the past that are, just for the elite leaders. So Patricia, in your work, I'm sure you do a lot of, leadership assessments, leadership coaching. They get executive coaches to support them, and it's expensive. And it's hard to have that many coaches live on demand to help an employee when they have a work-related issue. You would imagine managers in an organization to play that role, and the capability differences exist, right? Not all managers are also great coaches. So this is where technology can enable both the managers to coach better and more access to the employees to get that coaching. This field has really undergone a huge evolution over the last few years with the whole generative AI capabilities, agent as a coach capabilities. I do hear everything that was said here, that there are risks involved. Patricia, to your example of mental health related therapy or coaching, those kinds of things, I don't think we can leave to generative AI today. Just the risk is very high. And Valerie, your example of, autonomous cars. I think any use case, any application of AI which has an outcome related to human life, I think we are far away from generative AI or AI agents supporting that. Surgery, medical fields, mental health, any of this, right? So leaving that aside, when we think about coaching skills such as, employees look for coaching in terms of, I am heading into this presentation, based on the audience, how do I think about making my case? Manager, please help me. Side by side, an AI agent could give a lot of helpful tips as well. It can look at all the data that's sitting within the organization and provide insights as to, you can think about your presentation this way, consider this data point and this other content that might be helpful. So especially with some of the work that my team has been working on and integrating Microsoft Teams, that becomes very, very easy. So software like Microsoft, Salesforce, I mean, these are two platforms that I work very closely with. These platforms are sitting on this treasure troves of data that organizations have that they've not been able to make sense of till date. So Valerie, you made the point, right? The big data lake, like they don't know what to do with it. It's becoming easy now, right? Because there are agents now that Microsoft is working on, right? They called it Copilot. There's probably going to be more agents coming in. Salesforce did the same thing for sellers and customer service representatives, where they are now able to stitch together all this data sitting in all these different silos in different parts of the organization to become this agent at the fingertip of an employee that can ask a well-prompted question and get some insights immediately. So these are places where this has helped. In the world of coaching, tying together the leadership skills that Patricia talked about to the real world application, what could that look like, right? So, imagine a manager going into a performance review discussion and they want to very quickly look at a summary of all the different feedback individuals have given them on this person. So generative AI can help with a quick summary, right? If you give it a rubric and a framework, like these are the 10 critical leadership competencies or 10 critical technical skills that we expect from this individual, AI can take loads of all the data, process it, and give some helpful pointers as to, these are things that this individual has done well across the year, quantitative metrics and so on. Based on the feedback, here's some qualitative, successes, right? So all of that, super helpful for a manager. And then generative AI can even give them a call blueprint. Like, this is how you have a constructive performance-related discussion with your employee. Employee, on the other hand, right, can go and prepare, I have these developmental needs that I want coaching from my manager, or I have certain areas that I want help from my manager, to be able to put that together, take the help of generative AI, put that together, again, get the tips on how do you make that case with your manager. Maybe you want to talk about all the successes you have and how you're going to get promoted potentially in the future and what that would take. So how can you have a really positive, constructive, data-backed, conversation with the manager? So there are very specific use cases where today there are, people using AI without knowing they're using AI. That's the other aspect of it. So I work a lot with salespeople and sales performance, and they probably don't even realize how much of AI is embedded in all their workflows and all their tools, right? That they're already consuming and using. They don't think it's AI, right? Like, I think that's what's happening is the way AI is augmenting the workflows, the way agents are going to just become part of your user interface, right? So dealing with software, there's a lot of discussion, and Satya Nadella from Microsoft has been championing this whole concept that today we are interacting with software as a service, or you're clicking through and navigating different pages. this whole concept is going to change very soon, where really what you're engaging with is an agentic workflow, that agent as a colleague that you're conversing and talking with and getting them to take action. So that's the next level, right? The operator agent who can actually take action on your behalf. And you're almost like interacting with these in a much more natural language, probably in voice, right? That's coming up too. And that will be more of the way that humans interact with software via agents. And it's going to be less of humans interacting with software. So that's the other thing that I keep thinking about is there's only so much, that working with Microsoft Teams and all the collaboration that we can do via Salesforce, Slack, and all these different tools are going to help employees to some level. And then slowly you'll see some of these tasks, some of these workflows getting replaced by agentic interactions. So very, very exciting space. Lots of innovation that's happening for folks that are interested in the technology world. This is fast-paced, really fascinating innovation going on. And all of us in our work life will be experiencing all of this from the HR tech products and platforms that we use. Great question.
Very interesting. So maybe now we'll move on to some sort of questions that we'll just open up to all of us and kind of have more of a back and forth. I was going to ask a question that's actually somewhat similar to the first question in the chat. So the question that I was going to ask first is, as AI reshapes career landscapes, what skills and competencies will become most valuable for professionals seeking to stay competitive in an increasingly AI-driven economy? So that's the question that I was going to ask, and just to note that someone in the chat, an anonymous member of the chat, asked a similar question: how can we proactively future-proof our careers to stay relevant as AI technologies continue to evolve? So I have some thoughts on this, but I want to open it up to the three of you first.
I'm happy to take that one and start the discussion. I think of it all the time. My daughter is 12. I think we are, I'm thinking about what is it going to look like 10 years from now, right? And also as part of my work, I'm constantly researching this topic. So I think first is the good news. Multiple researches that World Economic Forum, IMF, International Monetary Fund, like they've all done a lot of research, which has shown that at a macro level, by the next 5 years, 170 million new jobs will be created because of all these advancements in AI. About 80 million or so jobs will be displaced. Yes, so that is a risk, right? There will be job displacement. But the new jobs that are getting created, there's going to be more of these new jobs created than the displacement. So it's not gloom and doom. We shouldn't worry about that. But in order to future-proof, I think a few things that I will advise any new, any student and students about to graduate, think of multidisciplinary learning. So you're not talking about, one area, one skill. You're going to have multiple majors. So think of AI, AI savviness has to go. I mean, that skill will almost be like one of 3 or 4 majors that you do. So you can, in the medical field, you can be a surgeon, but let's also make sure you have taken some, practice robotic surgery or looking at AI in medicine. And doing a combination of these kinds of multidisciplinary approach will help, because in the future, this is the direction we're going to go. No, most jobs are going to have a blend of all these different skills. Continuous learning is the other one. You cannot be complacent. So I am 20 years into my work life, and I need to ensure that I'm doing micro certifications, learning new topics, new skills constantly. And in the future, this will just become way more important. You cannot imagine that the skills you're getting from the graduation courses are all the learning you're going to do in your life. Imagine reinventing yourself constantly, frequently. This is something that is just here to stay and something that we would have to work on.
Great. I might jump in there and just say, having worked with I haven't made these generative AI models or the ones using the enormous data sets, but I have worked somewhat on some of the smaller models. And the way these models work is, well, one, they're somewhat expensive, and two, they require a lot of data to train. And so, that might explain why, whether it's successful or not, a lot of money has been pumped into trying to develop self-driving vehicles. There's a big market out there, and there's a decent amount of, well, they're collecting a lot of data to train it on. If you think from an economics perspective, a business is not going to want to undergo those costs, and they may not just have enough data to train a model for a somewhat niche field. Right? If you have somewhat of a field, there's only maybe 1,000 people doing it in the country, they're not going to make an AI model for that. So if you go back to Valeri's task example, you can think of what humans could do as a bunch of different tasks. And what AI is going to start replacing is one, well, as you mentioned, they're not going to replace the jobs that might have a risk of ending human life. But if you look at the rest of the subset, they're going to start picking off the jobs where there's big markets and lots of data. And so, it's unclear exactly how you might want to react to this, but anecdotally, I've noticed if you ask coding questions to these generative AI models like ChatGPT or Claude, that they do a pretty good job if you're asking about one of the languages which is very prevalent, like Python. But if you ask about a rare used language, something like Stata, it's much more likely to sort of make up an answer, to hallucinate and give code that actually doesn't work. It's not part of the syntax of Stata. It actually takes something from something like Python and tries to say, well, let's just try and apply that to Stata, which just doesn't work. So I think that there is some opportunity to try and carve out an expertise in an area that's less likely to be targeted by AI because it's sort of a smaller field.
I would add to this. Basically, we are talking here to Columbia students and potentially those kind of audience that's going to acquiring high-level skills, knowledge-based jobs and skills. So here, definitely, there is this large scale of knowledge production that this generative AI models can generate. But as we discussed before, you need humans to figure out how to assess the quality and act on that knowledge. Agency there is a trade-off between gaining productivity and losing control, which is for organizations difficult. And then in organizations, you don't have a lot of data like you have, for example, for autonomous vehicles, right? In comparison with what these models need, when you bring your data from the organization, I already described obstacles that organizations face trying to employ this data. So basically what you need, learn how in your job you're thinking about how AI contributes. Figure out how to use it, practice it while you are still learning at the university. And then figure out how you become, and how what we just discussed, the leader or manager of these AI agents, if we put it that way. So you'll have to manage them. And it's more similar to managing people who produce uncertain outcomes rather than managing machines, right? In particular, if we move into agents space. So you need leadership skills. What exactly they are, we can discuss separately. How these skills change as you manage both AI agents and humans. But it's something to think about. Be ready to be a manager, but be an expert in your field as well. That would be my suggestion at this time.
Okay, great. So maybe I'll move on to the next question. So again, I'm seeing a similarity between the next question in the chat and the next one that I was going to ask, which is, with AI automating more tasks, how can professionals pivot their careers to focus on roles that leverage human strengths such as creativity, critical thinking, and leadership? Somewhat, I guess it's sort of related. Someone, Ashini, in the chat asked, how can professionals in mid-career transition to identify and acquire the right mix of AI-related skills without feeling overwhelmed by the constant pace of technological change?
Maybe I can give it a go. actually quite like that question, that you just mentioned. How do we pivot the careers to focus on more leveraging human strength, creativity, critical thinking, and leadership? I think creativity, critical thinking, and leadership is going to make us stand out, and we need even more of that today. And I'm just pondering on Valerie's question earlier, why these skills are important now. Why now? It's more important now, and it's nothing new, right? Creativity, creative thinking, critical thinking, leadership. This hasn't been new. I think when I started my leadership consulting career more than 10 years ago, and these are something that we've always been talking about when we select high potentials, when we select good from great when it comes to leadership succession. These are something that has always been those standout attributes of leaders or talent in an organization. And I think what Gen AI does is that I think I mentioned earlier in my opening, is about that value adding piece. And that is what the beauty of us as humans, that we have that creative mindset, that we created Gen AI, we created technology, right? So to me, what it means is that don't stop, ideate. I think I totally could resonate in terms of how people could feel overwhelmed because there's so much information, so much data, such rapid pace. But I think with these changes that's coming up, and it won't, and these changes will keep on coming, right? With these changes coming up, what will set us apart is that don't stop, ideate, don't stop thinking, because what sort of could make us a better sort of a professional or a better career, and more interesting really, is that curiosity piece of things. And I find that even more so when Gen AI is much central in terms of the way we work. The piece on arts and history become much more important, because without those foundation of how we came about, I mean, I'm going a bit on the philosophical route here, but this is something that is of my personal opinion, is that now more so the creative part of things, art, history, language, it's something that is much more important for us to look into. So don't let go of that foundation of what brings us where we are today as in the professional world, because that is something that will require us to make that decision, to what Valerie was talking about, that decision rights. That will what requires us to do that sense check of what spits out to us, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Could I push back a little bit on this, right?
Please.
So think about creativity. We have excellent research done at Mac Institute by our faculty director, Christian Terwich, on creativity of generative AI. It was published, and there was an article in Financial Times, Wall Street Journal. Basically, first we need to define what creativity means. In organizations, typically, it's about recombining all things in new ways, okay? Right. If that's what creativity is, generative AI is doing pretty well, right? So here, of course, if we talking about kind of a major breakthrough, like at the level of quantum physics or relativity theory, Einstein kind of level ideas, the jury is still out there whether generative AI will ever be able to come up with something like that. But in terms of everyday new products, new strategy, go-to-market kind of approach, generative AI is pretty good about it. Our research, empirical research, comparing Wharton's MBAs to Gen AI ideas. Gen AI is doing very well on average quality, doing comparably on the diversity of ideas. But now our researchers are trying to, engage in prompt engineering to figure out how to increase the diversity of ideas that generative AI produces. So creativity, I'm not so sure will be able to compete in the long run with AI. Now, in terms of critical thinking, that's more interesting. On the one hand, you can ask Gen AI now to review anything. It produces very good feedback on tons of things. And research shows it's good at being a mentor, coach, and in all kinds of other roles. So it can give feedback. What it has a difficulty doing is arguing with you, right? All these guardrails are put now by developers of these foundational models in such a way that they don't object to humans. They always agree, which is a problem for us. Now we are trying to make AI agents talk to each other, for example, to enact a board meeting. They don't want to argue, right? So critical thinking might be kind of pushing back and delivering an alternative viewpoint might still be an advantage. But how do you, I think models have to get easier, have to be more open to debate. They're now difficult to make them debate, but we can probably will solve it. There's a trade-off, right? Make it safe and make them argumentative, right? So critical thinking is an issue, but leadership skills, again, going back to the idea that you need to learn how to manage these AI agents. That's, I think, something is very useful to understand in your domain what these AI artifacts do and how to manage them. And what also we learn, for example, from our exercises, when we make agents to talk to each other, debugging those systems when agents start interacting is very hard. And some, even computer scientists, believe it's impossible. So as soon as you engage agents in interactions with each other, so they produce, one agent works on the marketing side, one works on strategy side, they have to talk to each other. What you might get from that, no one knows, right? And so that's a major limitation of these systems. You need to learn how to manage collectives of these agents. That will be a very valuable skill for quite a long time. So again, leadership of humans and agents. This is where there is still a lot to do for us.
Maybe just a quick response to the first point on the creative thinking. I think for me, when I talk about creative thinking with leaders and high potentials and managers in organization, creative thinking is, how do I say, it's a combination of critical thinking. It's not so much as you mentioned about coming out with I think you gave about like coming out with something completely
recombination of old pieces in new ways. Right.
That's right. But what I realized is that, and it's very, I must say, it's a very fine line. So what I find is that, probably also my own experience and I'm working with these leaders, is that when you get Gen AI to spit out some of these different ideas of combining parts and pieces of thoughts and plans, what it misses is what will happen in the moment when it's actually being used. So meaning to say that when you take this whatever plans that, let's just say Gemini has given me some ideas about some sales plan and how to take this go-to-market plan and go out there, but that is something that is not proven, right? It's very much whatever Gen AI has given to me based on what they found in the data pool that they are using. Now, what it misses is how will the other counterpart will react to it. So what is more important for that person is that how do you adapt to that reaction? So that adaptability in the moment, Gen AI cannot give, because I'm now working with someone who's real life, who I cannot predict what is their reaction. So that's something, that's what I meant in terms of like creative thinking in a way of adaptability, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, creativity in interactions with others, right? It goes back to my point about how it's hard to make collectives of agents work in a way that it's to debug those kind of systems. That's a cutting edge thing, and many computer scientists believe it's impossible. We'll see. So there I would agree, right? You need this kind of interactive, um, collective intelligence, right? It's hard for AI systems still. Although some people believe it has to be developed for all kinds of reasons, but yeah.
If I could jump in there and sort of have a slight change in the topic as it relates to that question, in terms of trying to keep up with AI as it continues to evolve, I would encourage people to have fun with it. Use it in your personal lives. You know, maybe you're trying to throw a birthday party, and you might say, suggest some things I might not have thought about in my area. You know, whatever the geographic area is. I've actually tried it, and you know, it can work okay like that. And you can start to get a feel for what it works for, what it doesn't, how good it is at creativity. And that's often a good way to do it, because sometimes you can't do it at work, right? If there might be lots of things you'd like to try, but you can't feed proprietary data into ChatGPT, because then you're essentially revealing that to another company. But in your personal lives, there's lots of stuff that you could, you know, put in there and just see how it works. And I think everyone to some extent is in the same boat. It's going to continue to evolve. And so, you know, whether you're 20 years into your career or just graduating college, no one has a mastery of where AI is going to be in 5 years. People will continue to have to evolve with it.
Yeah, as they say, right? Your job initially is not going to be taken over by AI. It will be taken over by those who know how to use AI.
Yes.
So be those people that are early adopters, can use AI, get its value, integrate it into your day-to-day. That's the best way to stay ahead.
Great. So maybe I'll move on to the next question. I'll pose this. How can organizations foster collaboration between technical and non-technical teams to drive innovation and ensure AI adoption aligns with business goals?
Can you actually repeat the question?
How can organizations foster collaboration between technical and non-technical teams to drive innovation and ensure AI adoption aligns with business goals?
Yeah, let me take a stab at this. So, you know, again, I think let's draw an analogy to how digital transformation happened over the last 10, 15 years. Very early on, companies started to create these teams that would be the digital transformation team, right? That they would know what's the latest in digital technology, understand what to do with it, and then the rest of the organization would adopt over time. It was mixed success, because very quickly the realization was that it can't be separately as a silo. There is no separate digital transformation team. Digital transformation is something everyone is experiencing, and therefore everyone needs to figure out for their functional area, for their particular businesses, how are they going to adopt the digital capabilities. I think it's the same thing that's happening with AI. Of course, there are some very specialized technical roles that will remain separate. So things like AI regulation, data privacy, security in the face of AI. Yes, they're very, very technical roles that organizations will have to think about staffing within the IT part of the organization. But adoption of AI is something that has to be driven by each functional area within their own separate areas, because this is not, it's like a tool you're going to use, right, on a day-to-day basis. Like, you can't say that I'll have a tool that is going to work on Microsoft Excel. There'll be another team that's going to work on PowerPoint, right? It's a tool that everyone's going to use day to day. If you just think of all the AI capabilities as something that business needs to adopt and use, that could look different for different teams. Everyone doesn't have to be able to code or to be able to, inspect AI written code or have to understand, how to develop generative AI, how to, create LLM models. But I think everyone needs to understand from the business side as well, how do I ask the right prompts to get the right results? How do I use, as we get more into agents and operators, have AI agents review other AI agents' output to be able to get to more accurate results? How can I use it in my workflow if there's a tool that my functional head has enabled for me in my area, there was someone who asked, how will AI impact field of sales and business development? Sales and business development teams have to use AI to do prospecting, use generative AI to write targeted, personalized emails to send out, right? So this is something that every business unit, every functional area has to think for themselves on how they're going to use these capabilities for them. And like going back to the earlier discussion, first thing is we all need to understand how to leverage the value from generative AI and agents before we actually worry about how our jobs are going to change like 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line.
Just to add something to this, because the question is phrased, how can we make this collaboration happen, right? We have a toolkit in organizations how to work on interdisciplinary, interfunctional kind of projects, right? One idea of this kind of dynamic teaming, where you create for a specific, let's say, use case, you create a team of technologists and non-technologists, right? And they have to be united by some kind of big goal. They have to have a shared goal. Is it really about increasing productivity? Is it about transforming some workplace? They're all on the same page. And then you need the skills, hard skills. They have to be experts in their fields. And they should have soft skills, how to listen to each other, speak up, constructively criticize each other's ideas, but building on them rather than dismissing them. So there is a toolkit, right? And I think this kind of dynamic teaming is the best way to tackle this kind of very often open-ended, innovative questions as we're dealing with now.
Maybe just underscoring on what you said, right? But the team needs to come together for a particular outcome. And a lot of times, I think organizations go down the rabbit hole where the outcome is, let's use more AI, let's use more generative AI.
Exactly.
That's not the outcome. You can have multidisciplinary teams come together to have an outcome like productivity increases, right? Or let's be better customer focused. How can we do that better? So I think we need to build these cross-functional collaborative teams on business outcomes. I really feel like organizations waste a lot of effort in creating teams that are tasked to, let's figure out how to use generative AI more. Right?
Yeah.
Well, and even more, sometimes what happens, like you mentioned before, that we know that people use generative AI, but keep quiet about it for a variety of reasons. So, but I see from managers, they come in like, we know they use it. How can I capture value from that? No rush to capture value on the manager's side. Let people experiment, explore. It's more about not cutting costs. It's more about what we see from practice, increasing the revenues, increasing benefits.
Yeah.
There are two ways to make profits, right? Increase the benefits versus decrease the costs. Here we are on the increasing benefits side. We should be. This is what this technology is about.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier, Valerie, and I actually wrote it down. You asked this question, and I quite like. You said that our task jobs, because I was talking about the value-adding jobs and how automation has, sort of make a lot of jobs sort of redundant. I think, as what you mentioned, Pubita, a lot of organization has turned tasks into jobs. Because they forgot, what is the outcome, what's the business results here, but not all tasks are jobs. Because
exactly,
that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank
you. Would anyone like to jump in and elaborate on how they think AI might impact the field of sales and business development? Add a little more to that.
Yeah, I can take that because it's been a very recent research project that we did to think about how roles in sales are evolving because of AI and what's going to happen, right? So I can talk about some of those themes. So at a very high level, there may be 5 or 6 types of roles in sales. There's the people that go out and cold call and try to get new business in. The people, and that's like prospecting, inside sales type of roles. Then you have people that are doing business development, so taking that to the next level and actually establishing a need and selling. Then you have account managers that are growing that, that particular account, right? From from the initial what you've sold to them, and then upselling, cross-selling, and then you have people that are managing these teams, right? So there's like give or take about 5 groups of or job families within the sales world. Each of them are experiencing an evolution because of AI, because of these repetitive and, I agree with Valerie, creative parts of the job. And the research we did was, as an interesting title, is AI sucking the joy out of these jobs? Because what's exciting in doing in sales, right? You want to be able to tailor a message that's going to really resonate with the buyer, right? And when there is that magic that happens when your proposition meets the need of the buyer, it's like, wow, that's perfect. And that's what sellers live for. And if you give the job away to an AI agent, that's like, it's boring for the seller, it's boring for the receiver, right? The buyer. So we talked a lot about how selling is a human empathy game, right? Empathy being important, Patricia, as you were saying, right? It's a meeting of human needs with what we can offer as a solution. So while there will be significant portions, and we say about 30 to 40% of the repetitive tasks are already being sort of given away slowly to AI agents, and there's going to be more of that. But the really human empathy aspect of it will remain in the hands of the human seller. The number of jobs over time is going to look different, and what's going to happen, and which is why the new graduates, it's a little concerning, because the entry level jobs is where the highest risk is, where AI will start doing a lot of those entry level roles. And you still need a talent pipeline though, right? So if AI takes the entry level roles, how are new people coming into this field going to learn and practice to become the tenured folks who can make decisions? So this is and it's not just in sales, in many fields this is going to be the challenge, is how do you get the talent pipeline if entry level roles can be done by AI, and then we say, well, the direction, the vision, the creativity, like the human aspect of this will remain with humans. But if you don't give humans the repeatable tasks for them to learn, how are they going to build the intuition and decision making capabilities? I don't have an answer to that, but that is something that I know will be a challenge in the sales world for sure.
So if I could jump in there, I think I agree with all that. I think there are some features of sales that I think make it easier to train models on, and so might make AI a little bit more of a threat. So if we go back to self-driving, one thing that makes it hard is having a clear measure of what's a success and what's a failure. If you're looking at like some sort of video of a car driving or some sort of radar, some other measurement, if it swerves a little bit out of the lane, like how do you code that? You need a human to actually go in and say, was this a good decision? Was this a bad decision? With sales, there are sort of tangible measures of outcomes. Like, do you get a call back? Does this person end up buying something? And sort of like AI models are able to be trained on video games, become very good by having an objective where they can measure whether they're succeeding or not. I think in sales, you could see that as well. And so it might be easier to train AI models, even to be to show empathy or to banter with people or other things like that, because there is this clear measure of whether the algorithm is succeeding or failing.
Yeah, and I would also go as far as to say there's probably different kinds of selling, right? So maybe more transactional, business to customer type of selling can be taken over by AI. I mean, there are AI influencers on Instagram nowadays, and I'm going, how are humans following AI, like an AI persona? It's just mind-boggling to me, right? But that's happening today. Humans are following AI influencers. So I think, yes, B2C is a different world altogether, and I think AI can make a lot of inroads there. But in the business to business selling, I think it's very difficult for AI to take over a lot of the role, because if you imagine a business buyer, like beyond a point, you don't like the outreaches anymore from these AI generated emails that come in. You can kind of tell that, okay, there is no human behind it. And when you start actually engaging, you need a human to discuss and to think about how that's going to apply to my organization, how how are you going to be able to drive the change and get us to an outcome? So I think if you just step back and think about it from the buyer perspective, humans wouldn't like beyond a point AI kind of pushing something that feels impersonal. So I do think 30-40% of the role is going to move to AI, but there's going to be the 50-60% of the role that still requires that human connect.
Great. So I think the next question from the chat is maybe something that others on this call, on this video, might be able to answer quite well. I'm not sure that I would be able to, but do any of you have any thoughts on how job seekers can adapt to AI-driven recruitment process, such as automated resume screening, and ensure that their applications stand out? Difficult question.
Well, for our experts from Korn and Ferry, that seems like it's up to your alley, definitely.
I'll give Prubita a quick break before she jumps in. I think I, for one, and this is again a personal opinion. I, for one, feel like I'm not a proponent for submitting application into a black hole, like even without AI-driven recruitment process. Meaning to say that go into the portal and then drop my CV in. I've always been that kind of person that would, do some homework behind who the hiring manager is, what a company does, and I will seek out any networking events and people that's been part of the organization. I'll do those interactions first, and then I will. And it's a lot of work, but then that's something that I typically do before I submit my application or my CV, if at all. So that's something that I do, and I would advise any of my friends or family to do the same, because I think that personal touch it's super important to stand out. Yeah.
So maybe a couple of thoughts, knowing how these AI models run and how these algorithms are running right behind the scenes. A couple of tips. One is, if there's an opportunity to submit a cover letter in addition to the resume, please do that. A cover letter gives you much more flexibility in adding more context and content that is relevant to that particular organization that has posted a job. So take advantage of that real estate and add content around that. The way the resume scoring engine works largely is it's a matching engine, right? So it looks at the job that's been posted and looks at how much overlap there is between the posting and the resume. So that should give you pointers as to what keywords to include and highlight within your experience, and to show and highlight those and include that in the content. Have a section for your skills, have a section for your experiences and responsibilities. Don't include too much about your hobbies and things like that, which can come out in your conversation with the interviewer. Once you make it to that level, AI is not going to read that and score that highly, right? So there's little things. And I'll also say, do some research. There are free tools available out there that actually help using your resume and telling you how it will be matched against a job. I know on Ferry, we have a tool called Ferry Advanced, which is a B2C version, and you can get a subscription to that and almost test out how the resume will be seen by a screening agent, right? That's automated or AI based. So try out tools like this. Run it by ChatGPT. This is my job posting. Here's my resume. Ask AI to help you on how AI is going to see your resume. So use all of these different tools. There are lots of helpful blogs out there that list out the different things you should look at in terms of leveraging generative AI to both create your resume as well as help your resume stand out. So take some time, do these kinds of research, and those of you who are going to enter the workforce field all the very best. And I'm available, by the way, if you want to connect on LinkedIn to talk more. I'm happy to help out new grads.
Great. So maybe I will turn to one final question from the chat. In your experience, which human skills have proven most complementary to AI capabilities? And how can professionals strategically develop these skills to strengthen their value in AI-enhanced work environments?
So I think we've talked a lot about the leadership skills. I would say those definitely, right? So Patricia and Valerie both talked about that. I can speak to a few examples of what other skills are emerging. So if you want to really think about strengthening your skills, look at developing the ethical and responsible use of AI. This is something that is really important. It actually creates barriers to adoption. So if you as a professional can figure out how to use AI responsibly and provide guidance to your colleagues and to your organization, you will be really valued by the company. I would say build your technical proficiency with key AI tools. So prioritize 2 or 3 AI tools that you're hearing are really valuable in your particular functional area. So like my colleagues in the product marketing world are using generative AI tools that can produce quick Canva type videos, right? That can be used for marketing purposes, content creation, and things like that. So, keep looking at the top most exciting AI tools for your functional area and start to learn how to use them, which increases your value again to your colleagues, to your manager and others. So I think these are 2 I would say are pretty imminent and important today in any job that you have.
Just to add a little bit to this, indeed, we've been talking about these issues for a while. I guess since another question comes up, it's still not kind of completely satisfying what we are saying. To start, first of all, these AI capabilities are a moving target, right? We can talk about one thing, something will happen next week, it will be somewhat different thing. But so far, what I see, again, assuming you have a job in an organization, right? Not an abstract, you are somewhere. And by the way, freelancers, for example, are easier to replace because their jobs are usually a narrow task, translation or coding, just coding and nothing else, right? So that might be more vulnerable. If you're an organization, what cannot AI do today, right? That's the question you need to ask. One, tacit knowledge. An organization, it's not all, in order to train the model on organizational data, you need to feed something into it. You feed usually encoded knowledge that's already written up somewhere, right? Tacit knowledge is not written up by definition. Now, in emails, there is a lot of tacit knowledge because people exchange opinions about, a boss, a project, maybe, and organizations own that email databases, right? They can feed whatever they want. I've never seen any organization that dares at this point to do so. Why? Because it's very sensitive. You undermine trust in organization. Instead, I see what organizations do. They go to employees, try to interview them, for example, post-project kind of interview to capture whatever is not captured in written documents. So understanding tacit knowledge, what is the culture, what is the context, how different actors are engaged in the project, who has what kind of personality traits, how do you influence others? This is what where your advantage remains, right? Second, these models aren't good in long-term planning. Despite, you can ask a question, what is our long-term strategy, whatever, they don't have enough information, intuition, and imagination to give something credible. It can be very synthetic kind of and superficial, right? So long-term planning kind of considerations, strategic view of your field, your company. That's another skill that these tools don't replace in the near future. Next one is they don't know what they don't know, these models. Oh, sorry, they don't know what they don't know. There are unknowns as we, even for us. But very often we ask a question, we know, we have known that knowledge. The model might hallucinate instead, trying to satisfy you a given answer. So knowing what we don't know and what the model does not know might help you figure out where your advantage is.
Great. I don't know if anyone had any final thoughts they wanted to share, or if they've already sort of given those in the questions. If not, maybe we can let all of those on the East Coast get to their Friday evenings.
Maybe just a human empathy piece to end, right? Like, you're not alone, right? I just want to tell all the students listening, right? You're not alone. We're all in it together. We're all going to face it. So never feel like it's just you, that one person is getting, skills are going to go. It's like we are all in it together. It's a human existential question. We all have to figure it out together. So I think sessions like this are really helpful, where we have people talking about all the different impact. But yeah, keep reaching out, talk to each other. The value of networking, getting advice, mentorship, is never more important than now. So keep at it, and just remember, we're all in the boat together.
And I would add, it's still exciting, right? I mean, it's uncertain. It's we all get anxious. I think actually we didn't touch on this, but in education, we are really already in crisis. Now, I don't know what, Benjamin, you would say, but when I teach, I have to be creative about what assignments to give. I go back to my upbringing in the former Soviet Union, where we had mainly oral exams, right? Because written ones are just impossible to give. Oral exams, to those who are students here, I'm kind of practicing. At some point, ChatGPT will be able to examine you, maybe on a video, right, with a recording, and then we can look at the transcript. So we have to innovate here. So we're all in the same boat, right? And but there is a lot of excitement as well, because it's really changing the world in a peculiar and uncertain ways, right?
I mean, just jumping in there, there's a big question at universities, and what are we trying to evaluate students on? We're trying to evaluate on their ability to perform without generative AI, or are we looking for the best output in combination with AI? And I think that's a question that we're all wrestling with.
Well, we actually do it I welcome in class basically unlimited use of Gen AI. Only it's allowed unless it's explicitly prohibited, right? So, and that's the way to go. I think we should do it that way.
I agree.
Yeah, it's the creativity layer on top of what they get out of generative AI that differentiates students, right? It's like everyone can get to B+ now. To get an A+, that's where you gotta use your own mind.
Yeah. I think my final note is really simple, is that don't be afraid, keep on experimenting, be curious. Honestly, there are a lot of stuff that we don't know, and being courageous of admitting that we don't know, that's what will help you to move forward, and that just be courageous, because I think there are a lot of much more exciting things to come, and just ride the journey along.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank everyone. I'd like to thank Valerie, Purvita, and Patricia for joining me in this fireside chat and sharing their considerable expertise. And I also want to thank all of the participants for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Very enjoyable.